Basically, when you're looking at an open house, these are the common things you need to look for that could relate to a major structural defect or a major defect where you just want to do the Harold Holt. So the common items are cracks in brickwork. Okay, welcome to the Making It Myles podcast. I am Myles Clark, and we're here today for another episode of The Shed. Again, with the podcast, there's two parts to this. There is the journey, which the journey is all just making it in this world and trying to be the best that we can be, and just what I've sort of learned along the way. And then the shed is more with regards to my profession in the building industry, real estate industry, and helping people, just giving them some advice of sort of things I've come up with to help them steer them through and make better choices when buying and selling homes, renovating homes, and all those good things in between. On this episode, what this is with regards to open house checklists. Now, I have a number of clients that go out purchasing properties, and they've asked me all these questions about what should I look for when I'm walking through the open house going to purchase the property. Now, basically, when you're looking at an open house, these are the common things you need to look for that could relate to a major structural defect or a major defect where you just want to do the Harold Holt. So the common items are cracks in brickwork, which are greater than 4 millimeters, which in turn is the sign of major movement. Site falls towards the house slab or into the subfloor. So you've got water coming in towards the house and under the subfloor areas. You've got garden beds and vents blocking the ventilation that goes under the subfloor, which is a major concern. Tiles loose in shower recesses. Well, that's a given, okay? Floors uneven and diagonal cracks present to walls. So that again relates to sort of uneven floors. These are some big ticket items that you need to be aware of when you're walking through a home. If you see one or two or three of these items, you need to understand that this is what can relate to major structural defects. Best you get a professional in to check it all out because you might be buying an absolute lemon. So we're going to get straight into it. What we're going to do first is go through the actual checklist itself. So I'm going to make this checklist available. So if you can have it on hand or understand it when you're walking through these homes, which I think would be very beneficial. So the first item we have is brickwork. Now, most properties that we go to are brick veneer. Okay, so structurally, the walls aren't... the structural walls themselves are the timber walls within, and the brickwork outside is a veneer which is hung onto, to a degree, the internal wall or the internal timber wall. Now, it's important to understand that you can have decent cracks in brick veneer walls and it can come across as a major defect, but it might not be a major structural defect. Now, the reason it becomes a major structural defect, if it's double brick, well, clearly the footings have moved. If the cracks are big enough in brick veneer homes, so obviously greater than 4 millimeters, to me and to the standard, it can actually be a sign of major footing movement. So the footings have subsided for some reason, usually due to water, and that has caused cracks, okay? So when walking around a house, it's not... spend the time there to check out these things so you can ensure you make a good choice. You want to look for vertical cracks, horizontal cracks, diagonal cracks. Now, you might see some areas around the home where there's already a gap in the brickwork. The gap in the brickwork is a control joint. Now, that is in place for the bricks to move. So it is a control joint. It is meant to move. But if you find that has moved a significant amount, what we can gather from that is that this section of brickwork over here may have subsided and it's moved at the control joint rather than had step cracking through it, for example. Another good thing to consider when you're walking around the house externally is the plumbing. Now, we're talking about gutters, downpipes, leaks on downpipes, overflows of tanks that aren't connected to anywhere. You might have pools, ponds, all this shit around the house that can lead to these leaks and water pooling against the home. Now, the reason why we want to ensure that this is all in working order, or there's not significant amount of water sitting against the home, which we'll get to later on, but briefly, it just comes down to water is what absolutely destroys the home. That's what actually leads to this movement. That's what leads to these major defects. So getting that on point is super critical. So keep an eye out for the plumbing. Make sure that everything's on point. We've got here structural timber. So rot to large timber members, to balconies, pergolas, and decks. Now, some timber members that rot are not very significant. For example, the fascia, which is what the gutter bolts onto around the house. If that rots away, it's not going to collapse the home, okay? It's just something up there to hold the gutter up and finish off the home. But for example, if you have a double-story home and you're on the ground level looking up and there's a balcony, for example, the big timbers there, they're all structural timbers, okay? And if any of them have signs of rot, that can lead to collapse, major safety hazards, just big concerns. So the bigger the timber, the more important it is. If it's rotting, it's gonna be a major issue that has to be rectified. If it's just a small little pergola and it's just holding up a piece of ColourBond, it's not probably a deal breaker. It's an easy fix. But if it's holding up a second story or something of significance, it's a major concern that you really need to consider carefully when you're looking at these homes. Next external item we've got is roof cladding. So damaged roof cladding that will allow water into the property. Now, you don't carry a ladder around when you're on these open homes. If you do, you're a full-blown weirdo. But if you can get access and have a look at that roof, you want to be looking for major cracks, excessive rusting of the roof itself. If you've got an old home with the 6-foot galvanized sheets that's got rust everywhere, you're guaranteed that it's going to have the spring head nails, so the old style of how they used to fix roofs down rather than screws. They pop, water gets in there, they're going to rust out continuously, they're just going to be bent and broken, and you're going to have to replace that roof. So you're up for tens of thousands of dollars off the bat. It may not leak, okay, but it is going to be something you're going to have to rectify anyway. So it's going to be 5 years down the road, you're going to be forking out 20, 30, 40 grand, whatever the scope of the house is. So that's something to consider, okay, as you walk around these properties when you're on these open homes. All right, next we've got weatherboards. Weatherboard homes, they're beautiful structures, but they are a pain in the ass to repair. Not just repair, but more or less maintain. All right, it's timber. It falls apart. It's a pain in the ass. You got to repaint them. You got to seal them all up all the time. I used to think they were beautiful cottages, but after you work with them for long enough, they just give you the shits. So as you're walking around these weatherboard homes, just be mindful that you want to be looking for sort of excessive rot or gaps in the timber work, because water's going to get in. When the water gets in, then it just destroys everything inside. And as I've said before, water in homes is what causes these major issues. So when you're walking around the house, if there's a couple here and there, they can be fixed quite easily. But if a good home is something that's always been patched, painted, sealed, when it's been left astray for long enough, you might be pulling off half the house just to seal it up, okay, and to keep it protected. That leads on to the next one, which is just more or less the gaps around the properties. So what I mean by gaps is you might be have all types of claddings. Okay, you can have your cement sheet, you can have your billet boards, you can have your Scion, your matrix. Apologies, weatherboards, timber clad. Like there's all these types of claddings. But what I've found in these lightweight claddings, for example, is, and even like foam render, if it's not done correctly, is you can end up with these. One, minor movement, which is common in most homes, and it's not a major concern because it's made out of timber, which it moves, which is fine. But the cracks that occur when all this shrinkage happens is what can allow the water in. So if you walk around the house and you see all the cracks, it's usually on the vertical joins of like weatherboards and things like that, or up against windows. And that's where these issues occur. If there's heaps of them, they can actually lead to major issues. So if that hasn't been fixed in a long period of time, that's what can lead to mold behind walls, damaged plaster internally, damaged timberwork internally, rot of the substrate inside. The substrate inside most likely will be a structural wall. So all these things need to be considered when you're walking around to see what effort you have to put into to fix the issue you got at hand. The next is the roof structure itself. So again, you're not a freak, you're not carrying around your ladder to look at these open homes, but if you can step back on the road or maybe the neighbours or wherever you can get a view of the roof itself, It is common in some conventional timber roofs. So not a truss roof, just a normal pitched roof. You can get dips and dives. One of the main things that leads to these dips and dives, so you're looking along the roof and it goes and just sort of sags in a few areas. Now, most of the time, it's going to be the stretching of the barrett rod that they've installed back in the day. So what that is like a cable which transfers the load of the underpurlin and helps just spread it out. But what that does, it stretches over time, and it still allows that underpurlin or whatever it's usually underpurlin or a hip rafter to sag. Okay, now that's not a major concern because it's not going to sag any further. It can be rectified, but other issues that can occur, people can have come in, cut out rafters for no reason, or put skylights in and just cut everything apart. Termite damage is another one that could be a potential cause of this dipping. Be mindful, if you see these dips and dives, you really want to get someone else in to get in that roof cavity and check out what's going on and make a decision if it's a major issue or if it's just a minor defect. Now, the next item we're going to head down to are internal defects. So, you've got out of your car, you carried your ladder to the house because you're a weirdo, and now you're going to go inside the house and you're going to bring all the other tools in to make sure you know exactly what you're in for. Now, a big ticket item that inexperienced people don't pick it up as much as experienced people. When I mean experienced, I just mean tradesmen in general, like people that have worked more or less with timber, building floors, all that sort of stuff. We can look halfway across the room and know if something's out of level and know if there's an issue. We can walk into a room and we can just go, all right, this is going to turn to shit. So it's the floors not being level in numerous areas. So you might walk into a room and you can see, sometimes even in the skirting board, you might have a big gap in the skirting board at one certain area where it's just sort of dipped and dived, or you might walk towards a wall and you can feel the room just sort of sink in that area, in that internal wall, okay? Now, what that's a sign of is footing movement, okay? When they build the houses, we build houses level. We don't build them like a slip and slide. We build them so they're comfortable to live in, okay? So we can assure you that it has moved for some reason, okay? It might have been moved due to, it might have dipped due to like termite damage, just might have eaten the subfloor away. Could be footing movement due to water issues. Could be footing failure. There's numerous reasons as to why it could move. But fixing defects like that, most of the time you're going to be up for a fair bit of dough. So be mindful of that when you're walking through these open homes. The next internal item when you're in these areas is water damage. So around the areas that have plumbing, are there any stains, mold, swollen skirting, musty smells, swollen cabinets? Now, you'll only get water damage where there's water pipes. Okay, so if you're in a living room in the back corner, most likely there's not going to be water damage unless it's coming through the roof or the walls, because there's no water pipes in there. Okay, so when you're walking around the bathrooms, the laundries, all these sort of wet areas is which we call them, look down at the floor, look at the architraves, look at the door frames. If they're swollen, okay, because most of the times, especially in Oz, we use MDF products, which apparently the US is illegal because it's so bad for your health. Anyway, we don't give a shit about that. So soon enough, we'll all probably die from that as well, rather than asbestos. But that being said, you'll see it's all swollen, or you'll see it's all rotten away, and you can get a very good gauge, especially in hallways, because it's very common for us for us here, 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom garage, for example, where you walk down the hallway and you got 2 bedrooms, laundry, toilet, main bathroom, and that hallway usually, most of the time, if you're going to see defects, that's a water leak within the shower. 2 things: the hallway wall that backs onto the shower, or the entry into the bathroom. Okay, that's where you're going to see these issues with water damage around the areas, the wet areas themselves. Next internal one you want to look at is water damage ceilings, so stains present to ceilings. Now, this might be a tough one to see. It's hard to see minor stains in ceilings. Like, you can have a stain on the ceiling that's wet. Like, we will pick it up with a moisture meter, and I can just see it with the naked eye. But might be something you sort of miss. All right, so just be mindful that they're like these black stains. It's pretty obvious what a stain looks like, all right? The reason being is that could be a water leak in the roof, and that can lead to, again, further issues. The one big thing that is very common is you might see it often is in garage ceilings. Now, there might not be stains in the ceiling, okay, but what you can get is dips and dives and sags of the ceiling. So what can commonly happen is, I'm going on a bit of a tangent here because I'm talking about water damaged ceilings, but it's very important because it's fucking common. Garage ceilings, when the boys were hanging them back in the day, they just hung it like they did inside the house. The problem that you have with garage ceilings and plasterboard is that the elements are different in the garage, okay? It gets hot and cold, it gets moist, it dries out. There's lots of different, especially with roller door, if the place isn't sealed up, you can get a lot of like pressure differentiation where, air comes in and out and the ceiling can move and shake and drop. It is so common for garage ceilings to collapse. It is ridiculous. It is something I come across very often. It's a major issue because it's a safety concern, and once they drop, they just collapse all at once. There's no little section that drops. The whole thing comes down and destroys all your shit. That is something that's worth looking at. When you get a building inspector come in and he gets in the roof and has a look, he can figure it out for himself. It is difficult to see it from below because it's just flat plasterboard, flat white paint. It's hard to see the dips and dives, but it is something to be mindful of when you're also looking in these homes. All right, the next one is wet areas internally. Now, we spoke about water damage around the wet areas. Now we're talking about the wet areas themselves. Now, laundries, toilets, bathrooms. What else? Maybe under the kitchen sink, but we'll skip that for now. Let's talk about showers. That's what we care about the most. So we're looking for cracks in tiles, having them falling off the wall, cracks in floor tiles, missing silicone, things like that. Now, in shower recesses, which is where the main issue is, now, not a lot of people give two shits about maintaining their bathrooms because it's an expense and no one really gives a shit about it. So be mindful when you're looking into these showers, like don't worry about turning the tap on and off. We already know it's most likely going to work because unless they just live in this house and don't shower. You really want to look at the grouting lines. Most of the time, if you can't see any hairline cracks, there's silicone on the internal junctions, there's silicone at the bottom, there's silicone. These are junctions that need to be silicone because they actually do have some type of movement, okay? You need to allow for that. If that's all coming away, or you just get your foot. If a tile's going to come off the wall in these shower races, it's usually the bottom row. So you just get your foot in there and you just give it a little push. If you feel the whole wall moving or the tiles moving, it's a major concern. They're going to fall off any second now. The water may not penetrate into the wall behind, but you're up for redoing a whole shower recess, which can cost you a couple of grand, unless you can do an alternative. That being said, also, the biggest thing that comes up often, and just be mindful when you're walking through these homes, is just outside the shower recess. So a common item that comes up when we're doing building inspections and find leaks, the leak is not always the shower recess, it's just outside the door. There's either a little bit across the shower base that hasn't been siliconed, or there's a crack in the grouting, and that's just been sitting with water. Water sits there, pulls up, gets under that, swells up the floor lining below, or leaks into the subfloor. That's where these issues can be. They can be an easy fix as well, so just be mindful of that. But they can lead to major issues like I've done before is the actual timber that the shower base was sitting on had cement sheet timber. The timber just got swollen. It just rotted out to nothing. And one of the daughters put her foot through the shower base into the subfloor, almost cut her apart. It was just wild. I didn't know it could even happen. So if you don't maintain your home like these people, it's going to cause you issues in the long run. And just stay on top of it. Wet areas, they're a fucking killer. Anyway, I'm getting off topic here. We're talking about when you're walking through the house, not when you're living in it. The other one internally is walls. Now, most homes will have plasterboard walls. If you have large diagonal cracks that are greater than 2 millimeters wide, that can be a sign of movement again. All right. Now, sometimes it can just be minor movement. But if that's consistent to numerous areas around the home, or if it's on a rendered brickwork wall, it's going to be a concern, and you're not up for just patching the brickwork or patching the plasterboard. You'll be up for underpinning the house and doing a lot more than that. Right. The last area we're looking at is the building site. Now, this one here, no one gives two shits about, but it's super important. Subfloor. So a subfloor, if you don't know, a subfloor is anything but a concrete slab is probably the way to put it. Some houses are just sitting on concrete slabs. Others are sitting on maybe brick piers around the outside and concrete stumps internally, or there might be concrete stumps throughout or timber stumps. A subfloor is an area you can crawl under the house. Best way to put it. Now, do you see water, mold, or moisture? So if you have a look under, just open up the door, have a little squiz in there. If you can see mold, moisture, water, if you can smell like a really strong, like musty air, you're most likely going to have some issues with the property, okay? Now, that leads to poor ventilation, poor drainage. Poor ventilation is what can lead to, is conducive to termite infestation, can rot out timber, it's toxic mold. It's all these great things that we all want in our homes. The other one is water issues. Excessive water under homes is what leads to these footing issues, okay? And then what leads to that is the rectification process, which is most likely underpinning, re-stumping, and doing a whole drainage system. So if you find some of these things, which are the most important elements to look at when you're when you're doing an open house and it has a subfloor, look under the house. If you find some of these items, you could potentially be up for $50,000-$60,000, and that money you see will change nothing to the home. Once you rectify those defects, you'll be out of pocket $50,000 and you'll be walking in the exact same home as when you're there on that open day. So just be very mindful of that. It's worth the effort just to look in. The other one is drainage. Now, this might not be too easy to understand, but when you're walking around the house, if there's no like big square pits or drains, do you suspect that the water, like the surface water that sort of lands, naturally flows and sits against the home? So it can sit under it or it can sit against the slab. Now, if that's the case, what's most likely is going to have to happen is you're going to have to install drainage or have the natural flow of water flow away from the house. The natural ground level. So are the weep holes around the home covered by paths, soil, and garden beds? Now, two things. This can lead to rising damp. Rising damp is when moisture is absorbed past the moisture barrier and gets into timber walls internally, brickwork internally. The areas where you don't want moisture. That's the easiest way to put it. Now, what happens quite often is a lot of people will they buy a house which is 70, 80 years old, and people have just been building garden beds around it for the 70 years. Okay, so you started down here, and now they've slowly worked their way up, and they've covered all the things that are super important, like the weep holes around the brickwork or the vents around the subfloor. Okay, so you've got the natural ground level inside the property, and then up here you've got the natural ground level outside because it's been built up all these years. This is an issue. Okay, naturally the water is going to go pool inside under the house, which is going to cause you an issue. If it covers the vents, it's an even bigger issue because it's obstructing the ventilation, which then leads to all these toxic molds, all these issues that will cause you absolute dramas in the house. The other one is the weep holes. So the weep holes is for brick veneer homes on a concrete slab, okay? So you've got your concrete slab, your brick veneer. Now, just below your slab, you've got your weep holes. The idea is so moisture can come out and then drop through the wall cavity, and then no moisture can go back up. If you cover these, when this pools with water, that weep hole will allow water inside the cavity, which then can hit that timber frame and can get sucked up into the timber frame, then can go to the back of the plasterboard wall, suck up the plasterboard wall. Then you can have what we call rising damp, which is mold growing inside the home, which is no drama. no drama. It's a big drama. It will cause you a lot of issues. So these are the items that are very important and really need to be understood when you're doing this open house. I'm not saying every single one of these, if you have one of these, it's an absolute deal breaker. Sometimes you can have issues with drainage around the house. Might be a $3,000 fix, could be bugger all. And when you're buying houses these days, which are worth, $2.8 quadrillion because it's a piss take, that $3,000 is really money well spent. Now, so to close, I'll make this available so people can actually access it. I think it'd be super handy. So to close, you're rocking up to your open house. You want to have this checklist or be aware of these things. So when you're walking through the home, and if you come up with any of these items, one, there may be the potential of major defects. If you come up with any of these, I would highly recommend you get a professional in to do a building inspection to make sure that there's no other issues and you're not buying an absolute lemon. If there's none of these whatsoever and you're pretty confident, I'd be pretty confident that there's no major issues. There still might be minor items in the home, but nothing that is actually, that's going to be a deal breaker. So to recap, the main ticket items that we've got here, we're just going to go through the list. Again, externally, brickwork, cracks greater than 4 millimeters. Plumbing, gutters, downpipes, leaking, water pooling against the home or under the home. Structural timber, rotting large timber members, those big bad boys that are holding up all the important stuff. You know what I mean? Roof cladding, damage to the roof cladding, rusting roofs, holes in roofs, pretty obvious ones. Weatherboards, excessive holes, excessive rot around the whole entire property. Windows, gaps, excessive gaps that will allow water in the wall cavity. Again, the roof structure, if it dips and dives. When you're walking inside the house, the items you're looking for is the floors. Are they uneven? Are they move? And all that sort of stuff. Water damage around the wet areas. Are you seeing swollen timber, black mold on walls, all that rotted timber around the outside of these wet areas? Water damaged ceilings, so stains to the ceilings, the brown stains, black stains, all those types of stains, all the good stuff. Wet areas themselves. So in the shower recess, get your foot, give those little tiles at the bottom a little push, little see how you're going. Cracks in the tiles, cracks in the grouting, especially in the shower recess. Again, inside walls, diagonal cracks in greater than 2 millimeters is I think is fair and reasonable in plasterboard walls. And if it's in brickwork, you're up shit creek. Again, the building site, so around the property, the items we're looking at is the subfloor. Do you see water, mold, or moisture? As you open the door up, have a gaze inside. It's very important. If you have any of these items, you really want to make sure that is resolved because that is one thing that can lead to a lot of issues. Drainage, if there's no pits and you see the surface water, it would just naturally go towards the home and or under the home. Something to consider. Natural ground level. Are the weep holes around the home getting covered up? Are the vents getting covered up? Is the soil up here and the subfloor and the soil down here? Things like that is very important. So make sure, get this checklist, check it all out. I hope this really helped for people that are buying their house. It's even very helpful if you're selling your home, if you're a real estate agent, if you're just a novice person. These are some very important items just to understand because this is what will lead and usually leads to major issues in home. So have a look through whoever you may be, and I hope this helps a lot. Thank you for listening to the Making It Myles podcast, and we'll catch you on the next one. Thanks.
Let's work.